If you're listening to this episode anytime before May 19th, 2025, there's an important update that happened right after we recorded this episode. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has reopened the public comment period for people to weigh in on their proposal to list the monarch butterflies as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. This isn't unusual in the regulatory process. Sometimes these public comment periods will reopen like this. So when you hear us mention that public comment period later in this episode, just know that public comment period is still open until May 19th, 2025. And so if you haven't had an opportunity yet, you can still leave a comment in support of listing the monarch butterflies as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. So without any further ado, here's this week's episode. Welcome to the final episode of Season 1 of the Bees and Revery Radio podcast, the podcast where we talk about pollinator gardens, native plants, bees, butterflies, and other topics related to biodiversity. We talk about what we can do in our own yards and what we can do together to protect bees, butterflies, and habitat here in the United States. I'm LaDonna Howard.
And I'm Emily Wayland. As LaDonna mentioned, this is our final episode of Season 1. So today we are wrapping up our winter/spring episodes, and we want to let you know what some of our plans are for the rest of the year. When can you expect more episodes from us? What kind of topics are we thinking of covering for our summer season? And so on. But before that, LaDonna, how do you feel about the podcast so far?
Before this episode, I was reflecting on this because we said we would talk about it. And there are two things that I feel good about that we've been doing and that I hope we continue to do. Number one, I think we've covered a lot of good starting tips. So for anyone who is wanting to start a pollinator garden, or for people who are thinking about starting the process that you and I have been doing, Emily, which is transforming our yards from plain turf grass into something better and healthier for the environment. I like that we focused a lot on just concrete steps, tips for helping people get started. So kind of taking what we have each learned through our journey and doing it ourselves and making it easy for people to, to join us. So I like that. I think we did a good job of that. And I also want to share what someone said to me in a comment on one of my TikTok videos about our podcast a few days ago. Emily, you and I have asked for people to give us feedback on what they think about the podcast.
Yeah.
And a few people have come in and said, I like the podcast, and that is great. It gives me the inspiration to keep going. In particular, there was one person who said, I want to read this to you, Emily. She said, "Thanks for keeping my eyes on what counts and not wallowing in misery."
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. And what she's referring to, I think, is something that, you and I have talked about a lot. And Emily, we've tried to make a really conscious effort to do, which is, with the onslaught of all of the terrible news almost every day about what's happening with our government right now, you and we're trying to not just share all of the environmental news that we hear, but rather, we try consciously to highlight moments where the kind of people who we think are listening to our podcast, people like me and you who want to do the right thing for biodiversity in the United States, that when there are moments that collectively we can make a difference, we're focusing on those. So when she said, keeping our eyes on what counts, I take that as what we can make a difference on by doing together rather than just, being aware of everything every day. So I feel like that is sort of my personal North Star right now and kind of what I hope we keep doing. What about you, Emily? How do you feel about our first season?
So just to kind of follow up with what you're talking about with the news, I can't agree more with that because I think after November 5th, a lot of us were kind of in this state of like existential dread. I think that feeling helpless is very natural. I think the reality of things are very scary right now, and the threat to our environment is very real. Like that is very, very, very true. But as the weeks and months have gone by and we've focused on our scope on action and not just, dumping news on people because, sometimes that's all people do. They just dump the news out. They don't have any action items that people can do to fight back. And that's what people are asking right now. What can we do?
Yeah.
And I think that with the environmental stuff, yeah, we can't cover it all feasibly. Like that would be too much, especially because a lot of it is just going to play out in the courts. But finding little things here and there can make such a big difference. And I think so far, the feedback we've received from people on how to push back and take action steps has worked. And I think as long as we keep doing this and as long as we keep offering that, I'm especially proud of that with this podcast because we did start it at such a pivotal time in this country. And I hope that awareness continues to grow so we have more power in numbers. I think this first season was pretty good. Obviously, like, I think we're going to look back at some point and be like, oh, there's things I wish I'd do differently, but that comes with growth. And I
Yeah.
think there's so
Yeah.
much more we can talk about too, that it's only up from here. And I think something that I've always struggled with the native plant thing is especially like the messaging that Dr. Doug Tallamy, who we've talked about a lot here on this podcast, for those who might just be jumping in on this episode, he is an entomologist that runs Homegrown National Park, which is a native plant nonprofit. And kind of the whole idea behind his work is that he encourages people to plant native in their own backyards and on private property in order to restore habitat that's been lost because the land is there. We own it. The land we've destroyed is equal to what we own. So if we put that back, it's such a simple, approachable way for us to solve so many of our problems in this today's day and age. So just kind of going off that, I really hope that in the future we can keep up on that messaging and get more people involved on it because it I think most people do want to do the right thing. I
Yeah.
think there are some people that, just don't pay attention at all, but I think a lot of people care. Like we've talked about during like our lawn episodes, a lot of people, most people, I don't have a statistic on this, like seeing butterflies, bees, and birds in their yard. But I don't think the native plant thing is as it's obviously picking up momentum a lot, but I think we have more to go and I hope that we can get there with the work we do here. Was that too much?
No, that's great. I would also say that kind of in thinking about the kind of people who might be listening to our podcast, or maybe the way to put it is, I think sometimes, Emily, about who are the kind of people I want to be talking
Right.
with in this podcast. And so for me, it is people like me and you, right? People who want to do the right thing, are sort of ready to do the right thing. And so when I think back to myself, just over the last few years, what are the things that I have learned? And if I could go back a few years and give myself some advice, what would I tell myself? And so,
Hmm.
I don't expect that our podcast is going to reach the masses, right? But
No, it's
that's not what we're trying to do here. Our
right.
I think, we're talking to folks like ourselves who want to do the right thing, are ready to do the right thing. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I would love, we've said this before, but I think it's worth saying again that I would love for people who are listening to give us their reflections on this season as well, either through our social media accounts. Like I said, some folks were leaving this on my TikTok account, Donna Likes Plants, but they can do it on any of our social media accounts. And we'll mention those again at the end of the at this episode. And our email address, Emily. We have our email address, beesandreveryradio@gmail.com. Just check the spelling of reverie.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what people think. And at any point in the season, we don't have to be on break. You can always reach out. But I think especially during this break we have coming up, it's a really good time because this is when we will be preparing for season 2. So it's a good time for us as we get things ready, to, take your feedback in mind and see where it can fit possibly into the podcast schedule. And just, just because we're taking a break for a few weeks, we will still be pretty active on our social media accounts and looking for your comments. So like I said, we're going to be working on our summer episodes. We'll talk about that a little bit in a little bit. But there's other projects we're working on. Like we both are working on our own gardens, so we may have updates for you from our own gardens. Things in the news may come up, so we might have to address those as that news arrives. So we aren't really on a hard pause, but it's a good time for us in between each season to just kind of reflect and make things better and keep going from there. So LaDonna, what are your plans for the next few weeks while we are taking a break? Do you have any that you want to share?
Yes, sure. As you said, I'll be working in my yard a lot. I live in Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. And so my last frost date here is around the end of April. So I've already been getting radishes and lettuce in the ground. There's a lot of work that I'll be doing just on my food garden in particular over the next
Mm-hmm.
few weeks. And then I live in the Washington, D.C. area. So
Very
there
active
are
there.
yeah, there are protests going on. I think that this spring season, I think over the next few weeks, there's already been a lot of protests and activity and political work going on in DC. And so I think there'll be more of that. So I'm trying to do as much as I can on that. But honestly, also, Emily, I'm just looking forward to outlining some of our summer episodes with you. And who knows, maybe I'll also record a comedy short to release over the break. I don't know how funny the comedy shorts are, but I'm going to keep at it. What about you, Emily? What do you think your next few weeks look like?
Well, like you said, I'm going to be getting my gardens ready. I have some seeds in winter sowing milk jugs that I did share on our social media account just to kind of teach you, our listeners, one way that you can do that. So I will be following up on that. I don't know when that will be. I know a few people have asked about what happens next. Well, we're recording this on March 16th. And on Friday, it was like 70, almost 80 degrees here. And today it snowed a little bit and is
Wow.
40 again. So, like, we are not quite at a place here in Wisconsin where stuff is going to start coming up. But when it does, I'll let you know. And I'm looking forward to getting out to some of our natural areas because, as I mentioned during the episode with Kate, I'd really like to start going out and seeing a lot of these cool, weird spring plants out in the wild. Like one of mine I really want to find is a skunk cabbage because they're so strange looking. They just look like
Oh,
little aliens coming out of the leaf debris in the winter. And I've got a list going, but it's really nice to try to find these early spring ephemerals in the spring because there's not much up yet. So it's cool to just kind of see those little standout plants during this time. And a lot of them are kind of cool and rare and unique. And being a photography person, I, of course, want to document them
okay.
for my
I'm
own.
I'm gonna go and take some pictures of some Eastern skunk cabbage for you, Emily, because here in Maryland, the Eastern skunk cabbage is also native here, I believe.
Hmm.
At least I know that there is a lot of it in a natural area near me. When I was first walking through that area, it's just one of these little trails kind of in a neighborhood kind of thing. Anyway, the first couple years, I didn't actually see it this time of year, or I didn't notice it. I noticed it in the summer when its leaves are really big and broad.
Yeah,
Um, so I'm gonna have to go look. I don't know if I've ever like paid attention to it in the spring when it's just starting to bloom. It is a weird plant. So I'll go take some pictures for you.
that'd be great. And any of these little like plant adventures that we go on or anything like that, we'll post them on our social media. That's what it's there for. But yeah, I'm getting really excited about, improving my gardens more. And I think a big thing I'm going to be doing also in my gardens, besides planting food, I'm going to be doing that obviously, is kind of setting like my guides down for where I'm going to expand my gardens. Because in the back, obviously, I treat that more as like a wild prairie type of thing, but in the front, I'm trying to plant something kind of like cottage style, but with natives. So I think this year I'm really gonna make sure I get that a good start on that because I have not so far because I always bite off more than I can chew, always.
Mm.
So I think this year has to be the year where I, at least kind of chart out where I'm gonna be removing grass and putting flower beds in.
There are a lot of plants that are native in, different parts of the United States that really do make a really nice sort of cottage garden look.
Hmm.
With a cottage garden, they say you want different heights, and it has sort of a naturalistic look in a way, but very compact, very densely planted. Purple coneflower, Joe Pye
Oh
weed,
yeah.
those are some good ones, I think, for a cottage garden.
And I recently actually, and this is a good resource for anybody who is interested in native gardening, I think it's SAG Moraine Prairie on YouTube. They have a lot of free tutorials. And a few weeks ago, I watched one. It was a live webinar on cottage core or cottage gardening with native
Oh,
plants. And she talked about a lot of like, oh, what are the plants we usually see in like a European style cottage garden? What kind of flower structures are you looking at to substitute with native plants and what those can be? Like we're looking at some that are more, umbrella shaped. What are some natives that we can replace with this plant that isn't native but looks gives the same vibe? So
yeah.
definitely check out that channel because they even though they do have those live, you can always just go back and watch them in the future, but they always have free gardening videos like that.
Nice. And Emily, I'm curious what kind of food you grow. You said you're going to be growing food too. I also grow some food in my yard in addition to my pollinator gardens. What food are you growing this year?
So I definitely always grow herbs, but and I usually keep that out on our deck because if I'm gonna just, have something I need to throw a little bit in quick, I'll just go snip it.
Me
Um,
too. In containers?
yeah, I have them in like
Yeah.
a metal trough thing. Um,
Ah, okay. I do a lot of herbs in containers on my patio also because it's right outside my back
yeah,
door.
it's accessible.
Yeah.
And then out in the beds, I've always grown tomatoes and peppers. I'm a big like salsa gardener. And I just like throwing all those in. Like we do a lot of salads and sandwiches, so like that'll work in there. I'd like to do more like leafy greens. I've got a couple beds that I tried different things in, and I'm like, I don't know if I like growing this. So I have to kind of figure that out. I really enjoy cucumbers and zucchini, except for the squash bugs that tend to go towards them. But I think leafy greens would be good because I think something I struggle with like salads is like if you buy it at the store, you have more lettuce than you're ever going to use. So I think having it around fresh is just a good idea. That's a thought. I do have grand plans of I only have four raised beds right now that are about 6 feet long, I believe. I have plans to
Oh,
expand that,
that's
but
actually a
I
lot of space.
it is. I'd like more, but I think I've been kind of, figuring out what I want to grow, what's the priority before I add more. Because I want to
Yeah.
do kale, I want to do strawberries, I want to do squash and pumpkins. And I've got a lot of maintenance to do on those beds. Like they unfortunately get a lot of weeds because of it's hard to avoid that with your own homemade compost. And just like, laying down mulch in the paths and stuff like that, I think needs to
Yeah.
happen. I've got a lot of boring stuff to do, but that is my plan is just basically what I know. And unfortunately in one of the beds, I do some companion planting with them. And
Mm-hmm.
one year I decided I'm going to put some dill in with the peppers, even though I knew better. But
Oh,
that
and
is
it reseeded?
oh my gosh, did it ever. And what I think I'm gonna do is I'm kind of gonna let it. I might put the peppers in a different bed, but I think I'm gonna like work on pulling them out slowly because I do want them there, and maybe they just need their own like trough or like maybe a more cube shaped bed in the future.
Yeah, yeah.
But like because I do use a lot of it, and I do want the eastern black swallowtails to find me someday.
Yes,
um,
swallowtails use dill and parsley too.
Yeah, so I really, really want to make sure that I do attract them, but it did take over
Yeah.
everything. And
That's now your herb pollinator bed, I guess.
it is. And I've planted like cosmos in there and stuff like that as like annuals to just kind of bring more of them in, and it works really well, just kind of in between certain plants. But it's always an experiment.
You know, I've heard of people having the same issue with dill where it just reseeds really readily.
Oh my gosh.
I haven't had it yet be a problem here. I wonder if it's like the climate or the weather here or what it is. I'll get a couple volunteers maybe, but
Hmm.
it doesn't really take over the beds here. Hmm. I actually have to put down new dill seeds every spring.
That's weird. I don't even
Yeah.
bother anymore. I give them to other people.
Wonder if it's the variety of dill that I'm choosing. Anyway, I'll have to.
Food
I love,
for thought.
you mentioned leafy greens. I love growing leaf lettuce because
Hmm.
the same as you said about like if you get it at the store, like if I go and get lettuce at the store, and number one, it's getting expensive at the store, but you
It
get like
is.
one giant bunch of it that you kind of have to use all right away. I like leaf lettuce growing outside because I can just go with the leaf lettuce, it's cut and come again. You can just take the outer leaves, just take a few leaves at a time. So I like to take just a few leaves at a time for a sandwich or for a small salad. Wait a couple
Hmm.
days, go get more of it. Now, here where I am, it gets so hot in the summer here that the leaf lettuce doesn't really do well right in the middle of summer. It'll start
Yeah.
growing for me now, and I'll probably have it into June.
Hmm.
And then I'll plant it again for it to come up for me, in September. We have a warm enough September, so I'll have lettuce through like September and October again. And it grows so fast. It
It
germinates really
does. It
fast from
does.
seed and grows fast. Yeah, that's one of my favorites too. So, maybe we should move into sharing some of our thinking about the upcoming summer season. Speaking of summer, the summer season
Yeah.
for the podcast. Emily, we did, counting this one, I think, we've done 12 full episodes this season in season one, which is we're calling our winter spring season. The
Hmm.
full episodes, most of them, I went back and looked, most of them are between about 30 and 60 minutes per episode, and we released them every Thursday. And so Emily and I are thinking about continuing that schedule. We're thinking about kicking off in May and doing about another dozen episodes to run probably mid May through about early August. We might adjust that, Emily, of course, once we get deeper into the
Hmm.
planning, but I wanted to give people just a sense that we will really just be off for a few weeks. And as you mentioned, we'll probably issue a couple of shorts in the meantime. And then in terms of the content, what Emily and I are thinking about is going a little deeper into some of the topics that we touched on in season one, like caring
Hmm.
for native plants in our yard, what to look for and avoid at the garden centers this summer, dealing with grass and invasive plants, and of course, talking more about bees and bugs and butterflies. And Emily, you've talked to me about wanting to do another conversation or two specifically about monarchs.
Yes. If we get any intel on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposal to list the monarch butterfly as threatened species under the Endangered Species Act, we will update you. As of right now, the comment period is closed. There's still plenty we can do to help them. If we learn anything about how that is moving, we'll let you know. Just to kind of share a quick thought, as some of the environmental onslaught from this administration have kind of come to light, specifically with the Environmental Protection Agency. Lee Zeldin, who is the head of it, is looking to deregulate about 31 plus different environmental regulations. And as we mentioned in those episodes, in order to do any kind of protection with the monarchs with pesticides, they would need to consult the EPA. I think it's fairly realistic. We might not get any, if we get protections, there might not be anything having to do with pesticides in there. So we will just have talked to our neighbors and other people about how you shouldn't use them. So I just kind of, with that news having just come out in the last 2 weeks or so, I just kind of wanted to mention that because the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does not have jurisdiction over pesticides, they would need to cooperate with the EPA. We'll keep you posted on that. But in the meantime, keep planting milkweed, support organizations such as Xerces Society, Monarch Watch, Monarch Joint Venture. They do a lot of great work to protect and conserve monarchs and other pollinators. But also, this is the time of year where people are going to start thinking about rearing for the first time. So, something I really want to talk about is, should we or shouldn't we rear monarchs? So, we're gonna dig into that. If you are interested, you can message us ahead of that episode. I am happy to answer you and give you tips, but there is always new interest in the hobby as the butterflies return from central Mexico and Southern California every year. And just remember, if you're in California, it is not legal to rear them without a permit.
And Emily, it may be good here for you to share your personal TikTok account because I know you do a lot of monarch videos, really good ones. Do you want to share that with folks?
Yeah, sure. So my TikTok handle is at Weird Garden Nerd. You can find that in the show notes. But I'm also on other social media sites like Instagram and Blue Sky. So I will be sharing that on there as well in case TikTok would go away, because I don't think we really know what's going to happen with that.
Right, right.
And I'll definitely share efforts on our social media channels as well, because we should be expecting the monarchs here in South Central Wisconsin mid to late May. So in addition to the monarch stuff, which is kind of like my whole thing, I'm also thinking about a episode this summer that reflects on weather and even a bit on climate change, in particular the relationship between native plant gardens and things like droughts and floods. Climate change is only getting worse. Last summer here in the Midwest and across the US, we had a lot of historic flooding, and I would expect we'll see that again. And native plants can help with drought too. So we're going to talk about that, and I think it's a good time for us to look at our relationship with our landscapes and how those native plants can help with the effects of climate change. And of course, we'll have an episode to talk about fall native garden planting too, because that's important to feed our pollinators in the fall.
Yeah, so we already have a lot of good stuff that we're thinking about for the summer season. We just need to sort of dig in and get it all ready. And as we've said a couple times, we would love to hear from you if you're listening. Let us know what you've liked in season one, what you'd love for there to be more of, and if there's anything in particular that you think we should be covering or should be doing that you haven't seen done yet in season one and you didn't hear Emily or I talk about. If it is something that we have knowledge about or we can find an expert to bring on
Mm-hmm.
and interview them, we'll try and do that for you. Again, we're thinking about kicking off our summer season in mid to late May, and we'll release about a dozen episodes for our summer season. So don't worry if you don't see episodes from us for a few weeks. We will be back in time for summer. And we will also release a little trailer for the summer season when we get close to kicking off and when we have a little more that we can tell you about it. So make sure you're following or subscribe to this podcast so you'll be notified when our trailer is out and it'll let you know when we're kicking off the summer season. Emily, we'll probably do a short fall to winter season, maybe at the end of the year too, like September through November or something. So
Yeah.
we'll be here for you in every season this year.
And as I mentioned before, in the meantime, you can find us on social media at Bees and Revery Radio. I'll put our full link tree in the show notes so you can easily find us. In addition to checking the podcast for our season 2 start date, we will announce it on there as well. So thank you for amazing season 1. Thanks for listening to Bees and Revery Radio, and we hope you have a wonderful spring.